All right, welcome everybody to today's topic, which is called financial planning in uncertain times. I know this has been a highly requested workshop, and even though we're not doing these in person anymore, we are still able to bring in some of our experts in the different subject matter and to have them join in on this webinar. Today, we are lucky enough to have joining us today Scott Hill, one of my personal heroes in the industry. Not only has he been around longer than I have in the financial services industry, but he has also had way more experience in the different channels that are really, really important to people. We fly Scott all over the country. He's been all over up to Washington State, down to our office in the DC headquarters here. We've flown him to Texas. He's really been all over the place. And he's not just one of those people who has knowledge in one area. He's one of these guys that knows a lot about a lot of stuff. Not a little bit about a lot of stuff, but a lot about a lot of stuff. He's been on Wall Street. He's been on the radio and TV as a Social Security expert, and most recently his tax and estate planning webinars and consultations have really been one of the main focuses of our foundation. So if you're not too familiar with the Foundation for Financial Education, my name is Jonathan Lee. I'm the National Director. Scott Hill is the Southeast Chapter Director of the Foundation, and he is here with us today. Scott, can you hear me?
I can hear you great, John.
All right, great to have you today, Scott. I really appreciate you joining us today to help us through financial planning in uncertain times. And obviously, there's a ton going on to make these times very uncertain, to say the least. Our usual disclaimer, you can read on the screen here. And I just wanted you to understand that our foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit. We do not endorse any individual corporation. And all the information here is for educational purposes only. If you decide that you want to take action, we definitely recommend that you seek counsel from somebody who's licensed in your jurisdiction for anything relating to investments, insurance, tax, legal, real estate, or other financial instruments. That being said, our educational foundation is the only one that has a FINRA review designation, of which Scott is a champion of, which is the Certified Educational Consultant designation. So we have to have a minimum of decades of experience in this business, and then you got to come through our training program. But after all that is said and done, I think Scott's wisdom will speak for itself on today's webinar. And again, I think we're going to go ahead and just jump right in. So the majority of people on today's call will be federal government employees, but I know some people out there are also going to want to know some information that's outside the federal government. So we're going to be talking about a lot of different things today. And Scott, you've talked to me about this already in numerous times about what we call the new normal. And the new normal is going to consist of, ongoing volatility, tax changes, and estate planning changes. And we wanted to help people navigate through some of these crazy changes. Do you have any feeling, and I know, of course, you don't predict the future, Scott, but do you have any feeling about how long it's going to take for us to be able to reset our economy and get back to what we may be calling the new normal, and what maybe people should be thinking about as time goes on during this very, very unusual, unprecedented, and difficult time?
Yeah, thanks for asking, John, and thank you for having me on. Again, I'm giving you my opinion based on having been, as John said, in this industry for going on almost 4 decades. If you go back to 2000 to 2002, when we saw some volatility, and then again in 2008, 2009, those were restricted pretty much to our own economy here in the United States. Well, now we're looking at some of these global impacts that are occurring. And so we're looking at a brand new set of circumstances here. And if you look at what the COVID-19 has produced so far as really a global shutdown where people conceivably could only be working maybe 6 months or so out of the year, we're in brand new water right now. So I think that based on that, not knowing what's going on, not only medically, but economically, it's going to create some turbulence. So you've got to be in a position to not just look at your retirement and your retirement portfolios with a forward moving gear, but you have to put it in a position where it works in a reverse gear mode as well. So I would say that, planning for taxes is going to be very, very important. You've kind of thrown a lot out there, John, but obviously with a lot of the government money that's being thrown into the economy, it doesn't necessarily translate to productivity for corporations. It pays employees and so forth, but that money's got to be paid back from someone somehow, and obviously that's going to come in the form of increased taxes. So a lot going on. I think protecting yourself and having those safety nets in place they've always been important, but I think even now they're equally, if not more important.
So we're going to talk a little bit more about taxes today, Scott. And I know you counsel people on a daily basis about tax planning and tax strategies. I mean, people take for granted, I think, a little bit about how low our taxes are right now. Where should we expect taxes to go in the future, Scott? And when I talk about taxes, I'm not just talking about income taxes. I'm talking about cap gains. I'm talking about estate death taxes. I'm talking about all taxes. I mean, what should people start thinking about in terms of what we might need to prepare for?
Well, John, when you take a look at the debt that we have currently, it's approaching 24 trillion, or actually it's at 24 trillion, almost $25 trillion in debt. We don't take in that much money in taxes as it sits currently. So I think they're going to have to get not only creative, but aggressively creative as to what they are taxing and what they're going to go after in order to bring in more revenue. And when you've got workforces that are on the decline because the economy is shrinking, restaurants are closing, you've got a lot of these service-oriented businesses that, quite frankly, can't sustain being shut down for a few weeks, let alone several months or even years. Taxes were going to have to go up regardless. We are in a situation now where taxes have been on sale, which has been great. So the opportunity, the window to be able to take advantage of getting the benefit of utilizing the low tax environment that we're in right now, I think that is a shrinking hole that ultimately they're going to have to raise taxes, and they're going to have to get it from more aggressively from current sources, but they're going to have to look for other outside resources in order to be able to boost those revenues, no doubt.
And then the last piece is the estate planning stuff. Even before all of the pandemic was going on, Scott, the government kind of quietly passed a new bill, didn't they, last year, that went into effect January of 2020, that basically changed the way people are going to be planning their estates. They call this the Secure Act. Not in total detail, but can you just mention maybe the main highlight of the Secure Act and why it's so important for us to know about it?
Well, fundamentally, what the Secure Act did, one of the things it did was it changed the required minimum distribution age on your qualified plans, things like IRAs, 401ks, and so forth. It changed that mandatory date from age 70 and a half out to age 72, which was minor, but a little bit helpful to a lot of people. But it also changed how IRAs and so forth are passed on to non-spouses. It used to be that you could create what they referred to as a beneficial or an inherited or stretch IRA, where you could pass that on and maintain the integrity of that IRA for kids, grandkids, and so forth. Well, now what they did was they've eliminated that. And they've said, well, they have to take that distribution out over a 10-year time period. The other thing is it relates to 401ks, thrift savings plans, and so forth. Those are employer-based plans. And of course, if you pass those on to a non-spouse, you don't even get the benefit of the 10-year payout. You get taxed in the year that is, in fact, received. So got to be very, very careful as to how you handle those built-up pensions and IRAs, qualified plans, and so forth. Because if you don't do it right, you could lose most of it to taxes. So those are pretty much the big that happened with the Secure Act.
And we'll be going over some actual calculations of how those taxes are going to work. I wanted to throw up a couple of quotes up on the board here on the screen. Warren Buffett, Jack Bogle, and Shelby Davis. These are some of the greatest minds, financially speaking, of our time right now. And what they talk about during sort of financial uncertainty, market volatility, market corrections, we need these corrections and we need this volatility to sustain healthy growth over time, Scott. Isn't that right?
Absolutely, John. That is the main key, is being able to have the steady course, be able to control the volatility, and that way you have a more definitive future that you can plan on in creating steady streams of income for a longer period of time. Absolutely.
And you and I have talked about this before, and I'm startled when we consult with people that are just not doing anything during these uncertain times, like what to do during market volatility. Doing nothing is absolutely not the right answer. And I hear people say, oh, well, I didn't know what to do, or my broker told me to hold tight. And I'm thinking to myself, there are so many different opportunities to take advantage of now. We really need to educate people about what they should be doing. Nothing is not the right answer, Scott. What might they be thinking about right now?
Well, I think that a very, very close look at evaluating your portfolio, being able to define what the expectations are more clearly and definitively, and being able to make some changes in the midst of all this. Because my personal belief, and I know it's yours as well, John, is that I don't believe that the markets are going to be any less volatile going forward than they are currently. And you've got to be able to make the changes. You cannot just sit like a deer in the headlights and expect everything just magically to work out somehow. It's worked that way in the past over time, but it takes decades sometimes for these things to recover. You know, the last time this happened back in 08, 09, it took, what, 10 years for it to get back on track? So a lot of people that are close to retirement don't have, 7, 8, 9, 10 or more years in order to get back level to where they were. So there are opportunities now to be able to course correct, do it the right way, so that the next time that something like this happens, you're not caught in losing money and living in a world of fear and concern that you're not going to be able to retire with the quality that you had anticipated.
And can you briefly touch on the two things that you and I typically talk to people about during volatile markets or right after the market's gone down? How important is it to rebalance, and how important is it to understand how to Roth convert right now?
Well, to your point, John, I think that rebalancing is very important. And again, we define rebalancing as being able to take a hard look at where you are and see if there are better, more state-of-the-art opportunities that are out there that provide better benefit to control that volatility and give you some tax advantages and so forth. And again, as you said, you've got to be able to look at this from a Roth conversion standpoint in light of the fact that taxes are on sale. Right now, the current administration made the opportunity available to pull $100,000 out with some tremendous benefit, being able to pay that tax over 3-year time period. So even those folks with 401ks as well as IRAs, you have the opportunity to do some Roth conversions that up until a few weeks ago were not available. So I would say that you have very, very good opportunity now in light of that and taxes being very, very low historically to do some Roth converting. Because if you don't have the ability to control your taxes as you go into retirement with some tax-free money, which obviously Roths provide, you're going to be at the mercy of whatever the marginal tax brackets are of the time when you're retiring. And so if you're making good income and the government decides that they need to take more of your income, you've taken a pay cut. And there's only so many pay cuts that you can take. And as we just discussed, the government's going to have to get very, very aggressive with these tax increases and get very creative. So if you don't control your taxes, even if you do have a good steady paycheck from pensions and so forth, it could be detrimental if you don't figure out ways to offset that with accessibility to tax-free incomes.
Yeah, those are some really key words here, Scott. And I know people attending this webinar have different levels of experience. One of the things that I wanted to point out to you guys is we understand this is an emotional time. And, I would love to do a little meditation and deep breathing with you guys right now. But if you could just take one deep breath and just sit back for a second and understand certain things are out of your control and certain things you do have control over. Scott and I are only going to be spending time with you guys talking about things that you can control, because if you can't control, they're only going to lead to stress and anxiety. So things you can control, number one, you can control your level of risk, right? That's completely up to you. Number two, you can control how much tax you pay, and we're going to show you how to take over that control back in your life if you don't know how to control taxes. And number three, you can control the types of fees that you pay in different types of accounts. And what we have found by focusing on those three things is that certainly nobody out there can guarantee you get to make any more money in a performance-based investment, but we can certainly show you how to guarantee you get to keep more of the money you make. And we do use that as sort of our slogan over and over again, Scott, which you've heard. But how important is it to take somebody's emotion out of their financial life? Because no matter how much money you have or don't have, when you deal with somebody like Scott or I, it's not emotional for us. We do it all day, every day. We can help you make sound decisions. How important is it, Scott, for somebody to understand that you can have some fundamental understanding, take the emotions out of it, and make better decisions if you consult with somebody rather than trying to go at it alone?
Well, I couldn't agree more, John. I think that, we tend to live in a world of opinions, and we value other people's opinions, and we look at uh, and make decisions based on opinions that people give us. And really, what we tend to do through the foundation is we tend to look at things more in a mathematical, black and white, less emotional type of framework. Because at the end of the day, if you're led by your emotions, that's when people tend to make mistakes, financial, very costly mistakes. So absolutely, you've got to be able to, number one, have a plan, be able to define what you want. Because I've always said, if you don't know what you want, you won't get what you want. And the only way that you can figure out what that is putting it pen to paper, and defining what the outcome is that you're looking for, and then backing into that with a game plan, a blueprint of how to get there. So absolutely, you've got to do that on an unemotional basis, and look at the facts, bottom line.
And we're going to talk about, diversification, macroeconomics, comprehensive planning. But whenever somebody makes a decision in life, Scott, that decision has a ripple effect, and it affects a lot of other areas. And it is extremely difficult for people to quantify and identify the opportunities when something like that happens. Let's shift gears right now. Let's talk about taxes. Marginal income tax rate, Scott. How often do you consult with people, and not only do they not know what their own personal marginal income tax rate is, but they don't even know how to figure it out? How important is that?
Well, it's absolutely vital, John, because it's just like when you go to work and you're employed by an employer, you're doing any kind of job, and you're expecting to get paid. You want to know what you're getting paid for the work and the job that you're doing. Well, it's the same thing with taxes. If you're making a certain amount of money, it's nice to know how much you're going to be left with in order to enjoy your lifestyle. So it's vital that you understand how these marginal brackets work, where your deductions and the breaks are. You've got to, people all the time, they look at wealthy people and they go, there must be some sort of an inside secret. Well, the inside secret is they've studied the taxes, they figured out where the breaks are, and they figured out how to maximize increasing their net worth and incomes and so forth. So this is foundational to getting on track and understanding how the game works. And let's face it, the government has written the rules on how all this stuff works. It's absolutely vital if you're going to be in the game, and you are in the game whether you want to recognize it or not. You got to understand the rules, and this is at the very foundation part of understanding those rules.
And we have a CPA on staff here, Scott. As you know, we also have an enrolled agent. And when our clients come in, so seldom do we actually see a tax strategy that they are implementing. I mean, of course, people might have their taxes prepared, or they might do them themselves, but so seldom do we see an actual bona fide strategy that's going to show them how to save taxes now, how to save taxes later, and how to save taxes on their estates when they pass the wealth on to their inherited, children or whoever else they want to leave money to. So I'm going to just go through real quick, and I'm going to just point out to you, let's say under a joint return, you make $100,000. So that makes your taxable income between 78 and 168. Scott, does that mean you pay, if you're in a 22% bracket, does that mean you pay 22% tax on your entire income? Or how does that work? And,
Well,
and by the way, Scott, I do love listening to you talk, because you're so great at taking complicating things and making them very, very simple. And that's one of the things I really love listening to you about. So I'm going to throw that question at you, Scott. I'm sorry.
Sure, no worries. Well, basically what that means, John, going back to that third row down, 78,950 to 168,400, what you see is the tax on up to that 78,950 is $9,086. Anything over and above that 78,000, the first dollar on that 78,950, the first dollar over and above that gets taxed additionally at 22%. So anything in between that 78,951 and 168,400 as a married couple, those dollars are taxed at 22% in that range. So that means that's your marginal bracket, because the first dollar that spills over that 78,950 throws you into that 22% marginal bracket.
All right. And as a single person, if you made $100,000 as an individual, your income tax bracket is 24%. So your base tax is $14,000, and then you pay 24% of anything you make over 84 up to 100, let's say. So you'd pay 24% on your extra 16,000. So that's about 4,000. So plus your base tax, your total tax is about $18,000. So even though it looks like you're an effective tax rate of 18%, which is true, your marginal tax rate is 24%. So in order to navigate taxes, we really want people to understand what tax bracket they're in now and also what tax bracket they're going to be in retirement, so they know what their net take home is going to look like and make sure that they can have a comfortable and long-lasting retirement. What about cap gains, Scott? Most people I talk to don't really, I mean, they might know that capital gains taxes are a little bit different, but they really don't realize how different they are. How important is it to understand the difference between capital gains and marginal income tax rates?
Well, it's absolutely key, because if you have highly appreciated real estate or business or something that you've enjoyed some really nice growth on, when you decide to sell and be able to do other things with those monies, it's really important to know how much capital gains tax that you're going to pay on that. And obviously, that's a function of your marginal tax bracket, as you just said, John. So you could be paying nothing if you're in a low enough income bracket, or you could pay 15 or even 20%. Again, that's why paying attention to your marginal tax bracket is absolutely key. And that's understanding these things is what helps you make good decisions at the end of the day. And that's what this is all about.
And we have seen so many times the missed opportunity that just sort of makes us really frustrated when we see it, where somebody could be in a long-term capital gain rate of 0, meaning they, as a joint couple, they make up to $78,000, and they wanted to sell something, or they should have sold something without any tax at all, and they missed that opportunity. So our job is to really point out all the different opportunities people have to make sure they aren't missed. And taxes is just sort of the beginning of the story. We talked about taxes being on sale, Scott. We talked about Roth conversions being on sale. How important is it, and how rare of an opportunity is it right now, this perfect storm of market volatility and low taxes, to really take advantage of the Roth conversions now?
Well, again, John, it's vital. We're in a good perfect storm of opportunity, I would say, because right now we're in the lowest tax brackets that we've been in the history of our country, first and foremost. And secondarily, we've been given some special dispensation with all the market volatility and the virus and some of these things. The government has extended to us some special rules that allow us to pull money out of these qualified plans very, very favorably, not the least of which is taxes are very favorable. So as the old saying goes, get while the getting's good. And right now is the perfect opportunity to take advantage of some of these things that have been offered to us.
So the Roth IRAs, they're not just tax-free for our clients once they implement them. It's also tax-free for their beneficiaries and for their states and for everybody. Because there's no RMDs, they don't have to take money out of the Roth, so they can grow tax-free forever. And then the last part is, Scott, what percentage of your clients' money that you see is outside the scope of government control? Meaning if the government wants to change the rules on them, increase taxes, change distribution rules like the TSP, what percentage of people's wealth do they really have total control over, like a Roth? It's very seldom that we see that, right?
Well, it's very, very few. I think that there are people that do, in fact, do some of the Roths, but it's one of these kind of spur of the moment things. Even the people that have Roths, they don't have significant monies in the Roth. It was, one of those things that they just kind of did because they got a wild hair. But there aren't many people that we run into that specifically and aggressively have tried funding these Roth accounts with the idea of garnering a big pile of tax-free money. So we do see it. It's just not all that frequent, John.
What I'm going to do, Scott, is I'm going to just go to our calculator for a second, because I love doing the math on these things. And I just did this for a different presentation. I'm going to do it again for this one, and then you can comment on it, Scott. But let's say somebody has $500,000 in their IRA or their TSP or whatever their nest egg is. This is their life savings, right? They have to take an RMD. You just mentioned, Scott, they got to take it at 72, right?
Yes.
So let's go ahead and take out, I don't know, let's say $20,000. It's actually going to be closer to $22,000 probably. And so what I'm going to show you over here is, let's say they're in the 24% tax rate, all right? What I'm going to show you here, Scott, is these are the taxes that they have to pay every year on their required distribution. So over 25 years, they would have paid $150,000 of taxes out of their IRAs, but they still have $436 left in their IRA. How taxable is that, whatever's left?
Oh, it's 100% taxable.
So if we figured out another quarter of a tax here, Scott, if we added, let's say they have to pay $110,000 in taxes on what's left, maybe more, plus the $150 they've already paid, they're going to pay over $260,000 in taxes on that $500,000 IRA account. That doesn't seem right to me, but that's how the system works, isn't it?
Yes, government they've given you the benefit over time, and now they want their piece of the pie. Absolutely.
So I'm going to switch over and do the Roth conversion now. And rather than paying $260,000 in taxes, I'm going to estimate they're going to have to pay between $150,000 to $180,000 in taxes to Roth convert. And I know, Scott, you can show them some ways to reduce the Roth conversion tax, maybe even eliminate it in some situations. But if we can do some kind of Roth conversion or tax sheltering strategy, now there's no distributions coming out. They're not required to take money out. They can allow this money to grow. And then let's say they reach life expectancy in the early 90s or whatever it ends up being, that $500,000 is now worth 1.6, 1.7. How is that going to get taxed?
Well, in a Roth, it's not.
And so that's triple tax-free, right, Scott? It's tax-free to them in case they wanted to use any of this money over their lifetime. There's no taxes. It's tax-free to their spouse, and it's also tax-free to their kids or their other beneficiaries. This has got to be one of the greatest opportunities, which is why I wanted to step back and do the calculation to show people, gosh, what a world of difference it is tax-wise with just one of these simple strategies.
Well, and the other thing too, John, let me mention this as well. If you don't have to overburden your portfolio like you do within a traditional IRA with getting aggressive returns, on a net basis, you can get even more modest conservative returns in a Roth and still outperform because you're not having to work extra hard to pay the tax man. So you actually can look at that portfolio in a completely different light and have more money on a net basis than you would on an after-tax basis with the traditional IRAs and 401ks and so forth.
So a lot of times we actually don't need to take more risk to make more money. And I think that's what people don't realize.
Right.
Let's shift gears, Scott, to the estate planning changes. We mentioned the RMDs. We mentioned the inherited IRAs. The pushing back of the required minimum distribution age to age 72, I don't know if that's the biggest news in the world. I'm always leery, Scott, when the government comes with a new bill they pass and they say, boy, have I got a deal for you, right? They kind of give in one hand and take away in the other. So they might give us a little bit more flexibility in terms of not being forced to take money out of our retirement accounts until age 72. They're even allowing people to continue contributing to retirement accounts beyond age 70 and a half. But what is the real effect of these inherited IRA changes, and what can people start thinking about to protect their estates from getting completely taxed all across the board?
Well, we've already just talked about that with the Roth conversion, John. But again, let's just assume that someone has money in their IRA, they don't take advantage of the Roth converting, or they're not able to convert all of it. If they do have monies left in these IRAs and they go to their spouse, obviously those monies go to the spouse with much more flexibility. But if it goes to a non-spouse, be it a child, a niece, a nephew, brother, sister, neighbor, I mean, I've even had friends pass on these benefits to friends of theirs that didn't have kids. Instead of being able to stretch that out over that new individual's lifetime and taking required minimum distributions, the new rules change says that they have to be taken out over a 10-year time period, which means obviously more taxes would be paid as opposed to stretching that out over long periods of time.
So this is a pretty big change in terms of the taxation that we're burdening the next generation with. Roth conversions can help with that. Gifting distributions can help with that. Charitable trusts, charitable giving can help with that. We might even think about tax harvesting strategies, Scott, where people say, hey, let's not defer so much money anymore. You know, we were kind of brought up in the world of deferral. Defer. Why pay now if you can pay later? But something happened, Scott, that I think a lot of people were not prepared for. And I'll just ask you, what percentage of your clients are really going to be in a better tax situation that you've seen? Because I know your clients are much more mature than most people's clients out there. But, you know, what percentage are really going to be in a lower tax bracket so this deferral makes sense when they retire?
That's a great point, John. I've had a number of people that said, oh, well, I'm going to be in a lower tax bracket when I retire because I'm not spending as much money, and on and on and on. And the fact of the matter is, the government is making people take money out of these retirement accounts through these required minimum distributions. And again, you do not have the ability to outswim the tax man. There's no way that you can earn enough to outpace their ability to tax you away from your incomes and your money. So a lot of people are under the impression that they're going to be in a lower bracket in retirement. And I have yet to see that be the case. So
it's incredible that we're brought up in this world of deferral, and a lot of times, it's not the right thing.
Yeah, and a lot of the issue too, especially people do their own taxes and they're not familiar with how to do this. Doing the preparation of your taxes is a whole lot different than planning for your taxes. So just because people go to a CPA and they get them prepared doesn't necessarily mean that they're getting good advice so far as planning and strategy and creating an environment where they're paying less and less in taxes. And I think that's important to note.
So some of the changes, Scott, that are coming down the pike now have really been different than they have in the past. We used to talk about, furloughs and government shutdowns, but now we're talking about stock market volatility. You mentioned it. We're talking about global volatility. We're talking about potential unemployment higher than, we have seen, up to double digits. Oil prices crashing to never seen before lows. Interest rate at never seen before lows. I mean, we're in unprecedented times. So, what is your general thought on how people can just kind of start thinking about preparing for not just the changes today, but all the additional changes that we can't predict that may happen, tomorrow, down the road, and during retirement?
Well, that's a good question, John. I've always believed that most people, when they retire, they tend to look at the first 5 to 7 years of retirement and think that is going to be pretty much a pattern that occurs for the entirety of their retirement lifetime. You got to peek your head up over the hedgerow and kind of look down the road, like looking at traffic down the way, and kind of see what things might look like down the road. And I think that when the pandemic hit, obviously people were caught completely off guard. And I think that it is the new normal. It's the new reality. And I think that as we look at this, people now see that the markets do have a reverse gear. And when they hit reverse, it can happen abruptly. It's not something that happens on a gradual basis. So again, you've got to be able to prepare for all of these things and play what if kind of scenarios. It's like war games or anything else, or chess. You got to plan several moves ahead, play the what if game, and do your best. Does it mean necessarily that you're going to be able to cover every single contingency? Well, maybe not, but at least you can be thinking ahead and do the best job that you can. And that requires sitting down, getting with someone that is a preparer that's been through a lot of these different experiences. And let's face it, we learn from history. Look what happened over the last market corrections, and what happened, and what did you do in order to plan and prepare so that it didn't happen to you in the future. And unfortunately, with a lot of the people that we visit with, do you know what they did after the last market crash in order to prepare for something like that in the future? What did they do, John?
My guess is
nothing.
My guess is nothing.
They did nothing. So exactly you've got to be wise. You've got to be smart about this stuff.
And again, the title of the workshop is Financial Planning in Uncertain Times. I think uncertain times are going to be lasting for many, many years. This new normal and this social distancing thing is not going to go away just when people get vaccinated. Businesses are going to be probably not able to do the volume of customer service and business they were able to do before, because there's not going to be crowds allowed in most places, probably for the foreseeable future. So the recovery might take a lot longer, I think, Scott, than people think. And I also want people to know that we do have a survival guide. I'm going to go through that with you. And this is some of the just real basic things that people can be doing to be preparing themselves for these uncertain times. The first one is budgeting. Scott, we need a budget both while you're working, and you also need a budget in retirement. And most people don't have those. Why are those so important?
Well, especially now when people are questioning what their income might be if they were working and they got furloughed, or perhaps if they did get furloughed, they're having to take another job. I know friends of ours that had really good high-paying jobs, and now they're working bagging groceries and things like this. So it's absolutely crucial to know, what are you paying money on that, you could cut some of those expenditures that are absolutely not necessary. Where is the money going? And the more money that you gain control over that you can hang on to, it's just like, if you're stranded out in the middle of the ocean, you got to ration off your food, ration off water, that kind of thing. You don't eat it all at once. You got to kind of budget out what you have to live on. And this is no different. You've got to be able to budget. You still want to live a fruitful retirement. You want to enjoy yourself, but you don't want to go crazy with it and overspend. So I think having an understanding of what money you have, the incomes that are coming in, and what's going out is absolutely crucial to figuring this out. And it's amazing to me how few people that we visit with not only don't have an understanding, but they don't really have an expectation as to what they need on a month in, month out basis in order to meet the budget and meet the need in retirement with what they want to have in order to enjoy that retirement. So it's that's the beginning point. What do you got?
And a lot of it,
what do you need?
Yeah, and a lot of it, Scott, I know you've raised a couple of boys successfully. They're now independent and on their own and getting married and all this kind of stuff. But we go through our lives and all of a sudden we wake up and realize, oh my gosh, we're now nearing retirement or we're retired. And we don't really know because we haven't kept score. We haven't done the budget. So we don't really know for sure if we have enough money, if the money's never going to run out, if the money is going to be affected by volatility of the market or interest rates or taxes. And that's why we really, really encourage people not just to have a working budget while they're employed, but also have a working budget when they're retired.
Hey,
Getting
John,
rid of debt.
let me jump
Yeah,
in,
please.
John. I think a lot of the reason that too is that as we go through life, we tend to do more reactive planning as opposed to proactive planning. We get so caught up in life with raising kids, going to work, paying the bills, doing all the things that take so much of our time that we don't really take the time to sit down and do those things like to your point, John, of actually doing the budgeting and figuring that out because we're reacting to things that happen to us in life. So I think that now that people have been staying at home and so forth and having the time to be able to reflect and think about these things, I think the good news is we've been able to catch our breath and actually re-examine what's really important and where these things are and what we need to do to course correct. No question.
And we've also talked about getting rid of the debt and paying off loans. And, anytime I want people to realize, anytime you pay off debt, it's almost like giving yourself a raise. So you're going to have a certain amount of expenses in retirement and you're going to have a certain amount of income. A lot of times people focus too much on trying to get more income, but sometimes we can just try to get rid of our expenses and naturally it's like giving yourself a raise and that can be equally as effective. Now, Scott, I know you can talk for hours on this subject and this is one of the areas where you have such a vast knowledge. In fact, probably more than anybody that I've ever met in my 25 years around this type of industry. But how much of a difference can you make in somebody's life by creating a maximization strategy with their Social Security versus what the typical person does, which is just kind of do what they feel like rather than really figuring out how to maximize Social Security benefit?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, John. I would feel that now more than ever, it's vital that people understand because Social Security is one of those streams of income. It's a pile of money that you have paid into over your working life. And yet very few people have an understanding as to how to go about harvesting those streams of income properly in order to get the biggest lifetime pile of money. So doing those calculations and running that, it tends to be rather complex. It's virtually impossible to do that sitting in your kitchen doing that with a little hand calculator and a pen and piece of paper. It actually has to be run with software. There are a lot of variables involved. The government has kind of made this difficult in order to do on your own, and a lot of people assume that they're doing it correctly. But it does get rather involved, and you do need to know really specifically to the day when is the best time, not just for you to claim, but for your spouse to claim. And let's face it, everyone, Social Security income is the foundation that 99.9% of the American public looks at to determine, hey, am I in a position to be able to retire? You've got Social Security, you've got pensions, maybe part-time income, pulling from your retirement accounts, these types of things. But I think at the very beginning, as people analyze this, they want to know, hey, where's that predictable stream of income coming from as I begin this journey? And right at the forefront, obviously, is Social Security. So it's a big deal.
So Scott, I know you don't want to brag, and I know you're modest, but I've seen the analysis you've done for a number of my clients, and I know they can't get the information or advice from Social Security because the administration is not allowed to give advice. But how much money, do you typically save people, or how much extra money do you typically create for people by making sure that they have the optimal Social Security strategy?
Well, that's a great question.
Over their lifetime.
Yeah. And I would say this, most people, they look at their Social Security statement that they get in the mail, or maybe they've created their own online account at the Social Security Administration website, and they look at what that is at the various age points, 62, 66, 70, and they think, okay, that's what I'm going to get. A lot of things are left out of that. They don't include cost of living adjustments, increases. They don't include spousal benefits or survivor benefits. And typically, to your point, John, we normally find an extra, 100, 200, 300,000 on average per couple. We're able to squeeze out an extra 300,000 of additional paychecks from Social Security over their collective lifetime. I think the biggest difference that I saw was we found an additional $1 million of additional income checks from Social Security just by running the proper calculations. So again, it's not like doing your taxes, where if you mess up one year, you've always got next year to kind of course correct and make some adjustments. With Social Security, it's one and done. And if you pull that trigger at the wrong time, it could cost your family quite a bit of money. So getting those proper calculations is crucial to the quality that you're going to enjoy in retirement. No question.
Yeah, those numbers that you just mentioned, Scott, are staggering for most people. So that is incredibly important. And that is one of the things I know that you always make yourself available for people to do consulting on Social Security. All right, we talked about fees and risk and tax sheltering. What about emergency funds, Scott? People, when the market goes down, they don't want to have to pull money out of their retirement accounts or their investments for emergencies. Where might people be able to keep emergency money available in this type of situation?
Well, John, I have always been a big advocate, and I've told my two boys this. I said, you always need to have a minimum of 6 months of living expenses set aside, ideally a year of living expenses sitting in things like a savings account, checking account, money market, anything that is easily accessible. Because as we have seen in the past, when emergencies crop up, maybe you lose your job, which is a big biggie. You get furloughed or something happens. It's really important to have those monies set aside. Not only that, it gives you a measure of peace of mind, because if all of a sudden you decide that you want to make a job change, or you're starting a new business and you've got a period of time where you don't have that steady paycheck coming in, it's nice to know that you have the ability to pay your bills without fear, concern, or worry. Having that emergency fund, I think it's right at the top of the list, just like having a life jacket in your boat when you go out to sea. So, again, that's just part of having a good everyday, good balanced part to your portfolio, most definitely.
Let's go ahead and talk a little bit specifically about the TSP, Scott. I know the TSP that most people on this call have can represent up to 70, 80, sometimes 90% of all of their savings in just their TSP. We really want to understand how this works. We want to understand how we can get our money. I know the TSP has recently, just within the last year and a half or so, made distribution options much better. But you can also take loans on your TSP. But at age 59 and a half, it's an important guideline for somebody who has the TSP. Most people don't realize this, Scott. What happens at age 59 and a half to somebody's TSP as far as their options are concerned?
Well, the government made it available through some of the HIPAA changes and so forth, the Portability Act that was enacted a number of years ago. The government gave people that hit 59 and a half the option to do what's called an in-service distribution or an in-service withdrawal, which means that even though you're still working for your employer, be it a corporation or for the government with, in this case, TSP, you have the option to be able to roll that into your own individual retirement arrangement or IRA. And that gives you much more flexibility, a lot more options than the limited options that are available in many instances to these employer-based plans. So it does not eliminate that TSP or 401k. You know, if you're getting matching and you're contributing out of your paycheck and so forth, you can still do that. But the money that's sitting in there that's already been matched, you have the ability to take that, move that to other areas of opportunity where you might get better benefits. So tremendous benefit that the government made available to all of us once we hit 59 and a half.
And so if people take the money and do an in-service distribution and they roll their money over to an IRA versus leaving it in their TSP, when they pass away, if their money is still in the TSP, or if they're a teacher and their money's in a 403B like my mother was, or if they're in a 401k because they work for a for-profit company, if they pass away and they want to leave money to the kids, how does the money transfer?
Well, you know, we talked about some of the changes with the Secure Act, John. What happens is with these employer-based plans, which is what 401ks, 403bs, TSPs, 457 plans, these types of employer-based plans, you cannot do that 10-pay stretch out over taking the money and pay it in incremental taxes over a 10-year time period. What happens is if a non-spouse is to inherit that money from one of these employer-based plans, they get a check for the full balance in the year that that individual, the employee, passes away, which means they get hit with potentially massive amounts of taxes as opposed to having the ability to spread that out over time. So that's probably one of the biggest benefits, taking what money you have and at least rolling that to an IRA. Forget the performance, let alone it's the tax advantages that are made available by doing that in-service distribution.
And it's I was going to say, Scott, it's one of the biggest rude awakenings that we've seen people ever have is when, you know, a child, usually adult children, obviously, they inherit money from their parents and they've never paid taxes on it. So they got to pay taxes on all this money. And they're like, oh my gosh, it doesn't just create a larger tax. It actually pushes all of their income into a higher bracket and has all these unintended consequences that we're really trying to avoid. So nobody intends to save money and then allow their kids to essentially be penalized because they've saved so much money in these deferred buckets. And I really wanted to point that out. As far as allocations and contributions, Scott, how should people's money be situated that's going into TSP, meaning their contributions, versus the corpus or the balance that's already in the TSP? How should those things be managed a little bit differently?
Well, again, with the volatility that we're seeing in the markets right now, John, I think a more conservative approach until some of these things tend to iron themselves out makes a lot of sense. I think also the amount of the contribution needs to be looked at and where those monies are being allocated. Maybe in certain instances that people are overfunding these particular plans, so that needs to be looked at as well. There may be better opportunity to take some of those monies and allocate those to Roths for now, instead of building money that's going to be taxed at the end of the day down the road. Allocate some of those monies into areas of Roths where you're not going to get taxed on it down the road. So again, all of that is part of the planning process and looking at where your better options are. And I think this is an excellent time to be able to do that, to be able to drop back and reassess where you're at and look at this from more of a long-term perspective.
Yeah, that's a great summary, Scott. As far as people's contributions are concerned, we definitely want them to be more aggressive with their contributions because they're dollar cost averaging, they're buying more shares. I always tell people, if you're buying more shares and the market goes down, then good for you. You actually have more shares. That's a good thing. If you're buying more shares and the market goes up, then you're just making more money. So in either way, it's a win. But the allocation of your existing balance, that needs to be more conservative. And sometimes we don't see people with the proper strategy because they're doing the same thing with both their contributions and their allocations. We want to make sure that, you know, the proper strategies are in place based upon your time frame to retire, your risk tolerance, and all that kind of good stuff. So Scott, how do we know if we can afford to retire if we haven't sat down and done the Social Security analysis, done the projections on income tax rates, figured out our cash flow, and managed our debt? I mean, how and honestly can anybody really know if they can afford to retire? And is that basically what's causing everybody to say, oh my gosh, the market's gone down, I got to work longer. I mean, how does that really work? And do we want to save people from that pitfall?
Yeah, that is a fantastic question, John, because I think a lot of what the majority of financial advisors tend to do is they put these projections out that really aren't necessarily sustainable. At least that's the majority of what we see. But I think really for a lot of people, they don't have a good idea as to when they might be able to retire. They set it based on a time frame of, well, I'm 63 right now, I want to retire when I'm 67. What we tend to do when we sit down with folks is we go, well, what if you could retire now? It's not necessarily a function of time, which it may be for some people if they enjoy working, but it's more a function of, have you already hit your mark? And if you don't know whether you're already in a position to retire, it may very well be when we sit down, run some calculations and get this down to black and white and really define where you are, you may be able to retire a lot sooner than you had anticipated or even now. So having that knowledge is very powerful, and it's freeing to be able to know, hey, I may be able to retire a lot sooner than I had anticipated. So, again, it's all in the math. You got to sit down, do the calculators, figure out, is my retirement possible, number one, and is it sustainable? And if it is, over what time period? So again, you got to dig down, you got to run the numbers and see if it's possible. And let's face it, John, you've done this for a number of years. I've done it a number of years. It's fun to watch the reaction on people's faces when, you tell them, hey, you can retire now if you want to. It's pretty cool.
I had that exact same thought in my mind, Scott, when you were talking. I've actually had clients that have basically like celebrated and high-fived each other when we've run the simulations for them, showing them that they can actually retire now. Just because you can retire now doesn't mean you have to, but man, it sure makes going to work a little bit easier if you know you don't have to go to work anymore. I think it's an awesome feeling, Scott. I know one of the value propositions that we have through the foundation when we're counseling people is the idea of coordinating their taxes, coordinating their estate planning, coordinating their investment planning, coordinating their insurance planning. Really, macro planning is sort of what we profess to do. And I know you do that with all of your clients, but how much of a difference does it make being able to show somebody the ripple effect and the macroeconomic effect of these decisions together rather than doing it piecemeal? Or this advisor does my investments, this advisor does my mortgage, this advisor does my trust, this advisor does my whatever. How important is it to coordinate these guys?
Well, it's vital, John, because all these things impact our lives. It's like you don't climb into a car and you're looking at the tires separate from the engine, separate from the steering wheel, separate from the body and all the rest of it. It's all connected. And everything that you do in life is connected. Every little move that you make, whether it's pulling money from here and moving it to there or spending the money, your budget, your mortgage, your taxes, healthcare, long-term care, you've got that down. All these things are integrated. And knowing that you've got it all protected is a pretty big deal. I just talked with some folks that retired down to Florida, and the lady was all, upset. Oh my gosh, I'm losing everything, this, that, and the other. And we had done a pretty good job for she and her husband. And after the conversation of about 15 minutes, she and her husband walked away fully relieved. Now they're going out to the golf course to go play a little golf, and now she can sleep at night very, very well. So I think that having come out of the background that we did in financial services, John, people that are very specialized in very specific areas. If you're an attorney, you deal with the law stuff. If you're a mortgage person, you deal with that, and on it goes. I think us being able to look at this from more of a balcony approach and playing quarterback, it allows us to be able to look at all of these things and share with people how all these things are connected, and let them, again, look over the hedgerow and see what's going to happen 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road if you don't connect the dots and have all these things coordinated. So again, it's a lot of fun for us. We love doing it. And again, it's really refreshing to see the reactions that people have once they get a clearer picture of what they're dealing with.
And it really all is about control and understanding what's going on around you. You mentioned longevity, which is the last point I'm going to make here. Long-term care may be the greatest single risk that anybody has to their financial lives. It's going to cause some people to totally devastate their retirement accounts because they're going to need to pay for long-term care out of these taxable accounts. Can you give just a brief, I know we have entire workshops just on long-term care, Scott. Can you just give a real quick brief, what should people be thinking about when it comes to long-term care and retirement?
Sure, John. Well, I would say this, most people that we talk with, if they don't have it, they either think that they're immortal. I mean, if you're like me, John, I look at the mirror, I think that I'm 24, but I look at the mirror and I go, good Lord, right? We all
Yeah.
think we're immortal at some point, and we tend not to focus on things that we associate normally with people who are a lot older. But long-term care need can happen regardless of age. If you have a stroke, if you have a heart attack, or any of these kinds of things, it could put you in a different position than where you're at when you're fully healthy. So, the costs associated medically and so forth with long-term care, it's absolutely horrendous, the amount of cost that's involved here. And so if you don't do anything, the best that you can hope for is that the good Lord takes you in the middle of your sleep and you never have to deal with any of these things. But there have been a lot of changes with long-term care. The traditional long-term care policies have altered the way that they issue these things. As you know, John, we're not really big advocates of traditional long-term care. We do believe it's vital, but we're clever people here in America, and I think that there have been a lot of very exciting state-of-the-art alternatives that have come up that are quite appealing. And so if you don't know about them and you do nothing, it can be financially devastating to your at-home partner, to your spouse. So there are some alternatives out there that exist that are absolutely fantastic. So don't think that your options are shut off to you. There are a lot of options that are still available. It's just a matter of sitting down and seeing what you might be eligible for. But again, most people, they tend to think it's either too expensive, I can't qualify because of my health or my age. If you don't ask, you don't get. So, it definitely bears looking into to see what might be available to you. So it's a big, big expenditure down the road, and it hits most Americans. So we're big, big advocates of at least getting it addressed and see how it might impact your family.
And part of our evaluation process is obviously showing you what the government has available in their plan and comparing that to outside plans. And I think people are, pleasantly surprised with all the different options that are available once they actually see them. All right, well, that was a quick hour, Scott, and you always do an amazing job, and I really appreciate you chiming in and sharing your wisdom with us. But, where do we go from here? We want you to know that you're not alone, and I know 80% of people out there, folks, 80% of people are managing their finances by themselves, and that doesn't have to be the case. You have all kinds of resources available to you guys. None of our consultants or volunteers charge any fees for any meetings, any strategy sessions, any retirement planning. Even Social Security plan that Scott does, there aren't any fees associated with any of the plannings or meetings that we hold. So we don't want anything to be an impediment to having you reach out to getting advice and getting counsel. Focus on what we can control, taxes, fees, risk. We've talked about it this entire time. We want to go deeper into a personalized plan and a customizable plan just for you in particular, because it's not one size fits all, certainly. The only way we know what you guys are interested in and what you need information on, and more, terrific, amazing volunteers like Scott with his vast knowledge in all different areas, we can have them do different subjects, but you got to let us know on the survey who you want to talk to do a one-on-one meeting, what topics you want to hear about. Does your organization want us to come in once the economy gets back to normal? We can do our live workshops. Do you want us to come in and do the presentations? Are there other areas of concern you guys have? Please know that that's what we're here for. Fill out the survey. We will reach out to you very, very quickly to make sure you get all the resources you need. And as always, stay safe and healthy. And Scott, thank you again. You do an amazing job. I love listening to you talk. Are there any last closing thoughts that you have for our audience today?
Well, John, it was my pleasure being on. We love doing this and helping people out. I would just encourage everyone, take advantage of the opportunity. As John said, we are a nonprofit 501c3. We do offer these opportunities out to you as a give back to you, as our thanks. And we do love what we love what we do in helping people. So again, take advantage of it. Take us up on it. We're here to talk about any number of topics. We do cover a lot of other areas that were not covered in this webcast. So if there are other things out and apart from this that you'd like to discuss, let us know that also, and we're happy to help.
All right. Thank you again, Scott. Have a wonderful day, everybody, and be safe. Take care. Bye-bye.